Can see us. Oh, good. Um, Thank you very much. Welcome to the Institute for Policy Studies. IPS is the nation's oldest multi-issue progressive research organization. For 60 years, IPS has been engaging in groundbreaking public scholarship that does policy research that is shared in reports, articles, and media appearances. This work educates the general public as well as policymakers. IPS convenes movements, advocates for peace, justice, and the environment to craft practical strategies for change. And we train the next generation of progressive scholarships and advocates through internships and fellowships. My name is Netfer Freeman. I'm the events coordinator at the Institute for Policy Studies, and got other affiliations related to some social justice work, and particularly in Africa, but that's neither here nor there. We want to thank you for joining us today for the panel discussion forum, Kenya in Focus, the Defiance of a People and the Compliance of the State. This is it's going to be an in-depth panel discussion about Kenya's current political situation, including citizen-led resistance and the role of U.S. foreign policy. We must give a special thank you to our partners in this event, the 625 Movement, World Africa Now Project, and the Black Alliance for Peace. In June 2024, Kenya was racked by youth mobilizations referred to as the Gen Z movement, protests in response to the International Monetary Fund's, the IMF's neoliberal austerity program, austerity measures enacted by U.S.-backed President William Ruto. There's a whole host of other geostrategic developments revolving Kenya, like Kenya sending troops to Haiti, and really was essentially the U.S. imperialist designs in Haiti, but all kind of other things. The U.S. designated Kenya as I always get this term mixed up, a non-member NATO ally, major non-NATO ally. They're going to fill us in on this. I mean, I know a little bit about it too, but I mean, if you're a NATO ally of NATO, that says a lot. Just knowing that. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and they're pretty knowledgeable people. All of them from Kenya, but also that is what qualifies them. Because some people, I mean, I'm just going to say that some people think that that can mean so much. I'm not trying to belittle it, but sometimes we have to look at, the politics of things. I'm a supporter and advocate for solidarity with Cuba, and if we went by the logic that somebody coming from a place qualifies them to inform us about the political context, then some of these right-wing extremist Cubans will be the experts that we should follow when it comes to understanding Cuba. So I think we have to put these things in context. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and each, and in the order that they're being introduced, or that I read their bio, they're going to give a presentation. We're going to start with them being able to give about 15-minute presentation on various aspects. I'll try to say something about what they're going to say in their bio. And then after that, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. And that should be the program. Now, Valentine, you might have to correct me in pronouncing. I'm ashamed to say that. Valentine Kitai is a Washington, D.C. based public administrator and human rights advocate at the intersection of civic engagement, policy, and Pan-African solidarity, a magna cum laude political science graduate, and an MPA in global governance and management from American University. She is the founder and executive director of the 625 Movement, an organization that transforms the spirit of Kenya's June 25th protests into diaspora organizing, international partnerships, and an unrelenting demand for democratic accountability. We also have Luca Amayo. Amayo is a political strategist who has led high-stakes public affairs campaigns for candidates and causes at every level of government, including in barrier-breaking campaigns for Governor Wes Moore, Baltimore County Executive Julian Jones, and for the Maryland Democratic Party. We also are joined by Dr. Milton Nyakundi, is a seasoned journalist, communications, and media expert with strong credentials for advocacy, for good governance, democracy, social justice, and rule of law, and has been involved in advocacy efforts to champion the expansion of the media freedom space, as well as better working conditions for journalists and media practitioners in Kenya. And last but not least is Ashlyn Adjambo. Adjambo is an organizer member of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya and serves as, you're going to have to tell me because I put question marks there. I meant to ask you this, but it's also on the working committee of the Pan-Africanist Summit Against Imperialism in Nairobi that took place in Nairobi earlier this year. So we're going to start there, and maybe Valentine, you can help us give some context, particularly around the Gen Z uprisings, and what you think is a good starting point to give some geostrategic context to what's happening in Kenya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Netfa, and thank you to the IPS for having us. The 625 movement essentially means the June 25th movement, which is an organization that we formed here in DC to commemorate and remember those who were lost in 2024, 2025, and those we continue losing, and to continue to fight for a country that values human rights, a country that values good governance. So when we say, you actually framed it really well, Netfa, but I'll just get into it a little bit. So when we say defiance of a people and compliance of the state, we are thinking and we are describing a pattern that has been showing up everywhere when you look at Kenya right now, whether we're talking about the finance bill, whether we're talking about police brutality, whether we're talking about the upcoming elections. So June 2024, the Kenyan government tried to pass a bill, a draconian bill that was pushed by the IMF. The bill per se had ridiculous taxation. For example, 16% on value-added tax on bread, which is a basic commodity for Kenyans, right? Sanitary pads, just to be able to satisfy the IMF debt schedule. And when young people said no and took to the streets carrying their water bottles, their phones, and white flags, the state's answer wasn't dialogue. Instead, the young people of Kenya were met with live ammunitions. On 2024, about 65. The numbers could be more, but I'm phrasing the numbers on what Amnesty International had projected. 65 young Kenyans who were killed on that fateful day. On 2025, we saw the state trying to sell the Kenyan airport to Adani, a very corrupt institution from India. And when Kenyans said no, young people were still killed. I don't have the specific numbers, but maybe Ashley, if she has them, can tell us, being she's on the ground. But more than that, we saw a lot of young people being kidnapped by the Kenyan government. And the Kenyan government tried to dismiss that and say that young Kenyans were abducting themselves. Early last year, we had a journalist by the name Albert Ojwang, who was also taken by the Kenyan government all the way from the Western province and brought into Nairobi and killed in the police station. So those single moments tell you everything about the relationship between Kenyan citizens and Kenyan institutions right now. So the Kenyan state right now has to respond to external pressure, right? Whether it's from Washington, whether it's from the IMF, whether we're talking about bilateral patterns, but it's been extremely unresponsive to Kenyans themselves. We saw our president, the Kenyan president, William Samoei Ruto, pay a conservative lobbying firm here in the United States to lobby on his behalf to the new administration. But one thing that I want for us to tonight to discuss is it's not just about the one finance bill or two finance bills that have been passed, but what we are experiencing in Kenya is structural condition. We're talking about elections, police brutality, taxation, foreign aid, patterns that keep repeating themselves. And one that has been coming up that Kenyans have been pushing to be recognized as a national crisis is femicide, the murdering of women in Kenya. And Kenyan youth are the majority right now and continue to suffer from unemployment as much as Kenyan youth are highly educated. But we are becoming increasingly organized, whether it's in person and online, and we're trying to build a system where we can hold these politicians accountable. Kenya right now is being led, or Kenya at the moment is a how do you say it? Kakitroscracy, which is technically we have a government that is being led by thieves, for thieves, and by thieves. And yeah, I'll finish by saying that at the moment. Pass it on to Netfa.
Sure. I'm happy to jump in, and grateful for the invitation. My comrade Valentine is absolutely right about the state of Kenyan politics. It is becoming more and more clear every day that the constituency that our government was built to serve is anyone but the people of the country. And the finance bill that led to these protests, I think, is a good place to start, because as you look at that and start to zoom out, you start to see why this is a structural issue that will persist regardless of who sits in the office of the president, and for the most part, regardless of who sits in office here in Washington, D.C. The finance bill itself that led to widespread protests, led by young Kenyans who very bravely went out on the streets and faced live rounds from police who had pledged to serve the people of the country. The finance bill itself was on the heels of austerity measures that had been enforced by the IMF. The government was seeking a new round of loans, $1 billion, around $1 billion that they would have received from the International Monetary Fund, and to receive that allocation, they were going to have to raise $2.7 billion worth of revenue, and half of the $1 billion that they were promised, they received in advance of the measures being enforced. But in exchange for the next allotment of funds to be granted to the country, there was a couple of things that they had to do, and one of it was induce tax revenue of 2.7 billion worth from the Kenyan people. How do they induce that level of tax revenue? It's informed by what we all come to understand as a Washington consensus. We want to see you boost the amount of revenue you're collecting. We want to see less public spending on the things that working people tend to care about. And we saw the draconian measures, some of which you've heard from Val, the things that they had to raise taxes on to meet this high threshold. It was flour, it was sanitary pads, it was oil, cooking oil. It was things that it was a very aggressive tax regime that hurts the people who could least afford it. And I think ultimately the level, the tenacity of the protesters out there, young people just like us, did force some sort of reconsideration of their approach. It did not pull them back altogether from this sort of regime, but they recognized they had to change tactics. Of course, on the face of those protests, it was very violent. A number of people were killed, a number of people were arrested, a number of people were abducted. But there was a broader recognition within the government and with their multilateral partners here in DC that they could not be as aggressive with the measures that they advanced. They did not issue the second half of the $1 billion that was promised to Kenya in exchange for inducing this tax revenue. And at least cosmetically, on the face of it, they started to change their policies about how they allocate these funds. They say now we want to see more social more social investments made. They want to see more anti-corruption measures made, but we want to put more restrictions on the governments that are receiving these funds. And on the face of it, that is certainly some measure of success. Might be too generous, but it's some measure that it had an impact on the conversations that these governments were having with their donors out here. But structurally, when you ask yourself, why does this happen? Why is it? I think most people, when they think of a government, um, we tend to assume that the primary constituency that the government's supposed to be catering to is the people that it's represented to serve. We don't want to do something that's going to piss the people off. We don't want to do something that's going to drive them to the streets. That's not the kind of relationship that governments like ours typically have with the people. When you think of I would call Kenya a police state. I would call it one of the premier police states that you have in sub-Saharan Africa. There's more notorious ones that people are more aware of, like Egypt and other North African countries. But Kenya is working extra hard to earn the distinction of the best police state that you can have on this side, south of the tropics. And in those kinds of governments, their primary constituency is the people who can allocate the funds to the governments that will keep the party going for the political class that will continue to fund their lifestyles and give them the money for their patronage networks. But the way that inverts the relationship with the people, it means the people are not a constituency, but more like a problem to be managed. And they need the architecture to be able to manage that problem. And when I say architecture to manage that problem, I'm talking about security relationships. We're talking about guns and tanks. We're talking about support for police forces, for GSU, crowd control. And America has become the biggest partner to Kenya in these efforts. Traditionally, historically, it was Europe and the UK and these colonial powers. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about what that transition looked like and what's in it for America to ensure those relationships. But for Kenya to now emerge as the first sub-Saharan African country to earn major non-NATO ally status, meaning they get a privileged position in the buying of those arms. They get subsidies for those arms. They get access to some of the frontline weapons for these tertiary markets. Gives them an advantage in being able to play the role that is expected to them, which is control the people, manage the negative externalities of austerity measures, and keep the extraction of wealth flowing out of the country. So as long as you can continue to service the debt, as long as you can continue to ensure open access to markets, as long as you can continue to allow us to bring our multinationals to crush your infant industries, we will give you everything you need to suppress the people who end up hurt on the back end of that. So as long as to put it more simply, as long as America continues to give them the means to suppress us, to kill us, the government's job is to make sure wealth continues to flow out of nations like ours here close into the core through these multilateral relationships. That's where the population finds itself. And the last thing I'll say is, this project is getting much more, the nature of these protests is this relationship is becoming much more difficult to sustain. A colonial state was built to suppress a much smaller group of people. 6 million on the heels of independence is now 50 million. It is a population that is younger, over 75% under the age of 35. It is better connected because of the internet, networks of organization that a colonial state is not built to push back on. It's a stress test for whether the new toys that they're being given will still be able to suppress a newer, younger, modern population that is able to organize along lines that weren't even possible maybe just a generation ago. So I'll park it there. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take the the moderator's prerogative. I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit, brother.
Yeah,
I appreciate your comments, and I think what's often the case when it comes to Africa, what's often neglected in understanding Africa is complexity and context, particularly historical context. And this brother, gave a really good presentation before, and I wanted to see, and so this is going to be this
sure.
was a presentation. It was really good historical overview, but he had more time, he had visuals and everything. So I'm going to ask you to do some magic and see what you can, if what you can share with us here that's boiled down into less time
Yeah,
and doesn't have the advantage of the visuals.
sure.
And so you went back, colonialism, and it's kind of a analysis. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so once our Kenya was originally colonized by the British government, right? And um, to the first step to doing that was to impose measures that they'd already imposed on their local population, which is to commoditize the land. You have to, once you take away the land from people, you take away their ability to subsist. You force them into a position where they have to earn a wage to get by. And you tax that wage, meaning they have to participate in the wage economy to do that. So taking away the land is very important. And the commoditization of land in Africa was a very important first step to establishing the colonial project. The infrastructure that they built to forcefully establish those relationships was sort of the foundation that the modern police state was built upon. These were Kenya is also unusual in sub-Saharan Africa in the sense that it wasn't designed for indirect rule. When the British came into Kenya, they were planning to stay. They were planning to make this a settler colony where tens of thousands of British settlers could live amongst hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the native population. So when you have a minority controlling such you have this demographic imbalance of the people you want to control. You have to develop a very sophisticated security operation to be able to manage the discontent of the population. So this is one of the places where they had to manage some of their most invest in some of their most sophisticated architecture to do that. Fortunately, they had some experience in other areas in Malaya, which was part of China at the time, where they were fighting colonialists. They were fighting guerrilla warfare before they were ever doing it with us. They had experience in parts of the Middle East, like Aden and Bahrain and Mandatory Palestine, and they had they learned early on that people who are very good at suppressing these indigenous populations in one market, let's call it, could be transferred and brought to do it in another market where they were having trouble. Malaya was sort of where this handbook was written, but because of the ferocity and the tenacity of the guerrilla warfare in Kenya through the Mau Mau revolt, our fight for independence that was led by guerrilla fighters in Kenya, they had to take more extreme measures than they'd ever had to take anywhere else, controlling such a large population, forcing them into what we call villagization, limiting their ability to move around, and keeping a registry of every person who was part of this population, the foundation of modern biometrics. What they called at the time counterinsurgency became the foundation of how security operations and a lot of modern states operate today. When you're talking about the alphabet industries, our neighbors down here in Virginia, and some of the modern tactics that they use have their foundations in the counterinsurgency tactics these colonialist powers were using to control these local populations. When as the UK declines in power and the pressures of this system are getting more pronounced, and America is rising at the time, there's a need to renegotiate these relationships. First, they have to cosmetically give the indigenous people independence, and independence is what we call it, but in reality, it's elevating a local class a local elite political class who will do the job that these white officers were doing historically. But it also means that America is emerging as the more dominant player, and they inherit the security architecture these colonial players used to have. They called it the Five Eyes Alliance at the time. The UK, New Zealand, the former Western powers that had indigenous networks of security to suppress the local population now had to hand over their playbooks, had to hand over their intelligence, had to hand over. They were all looking for ways to make themselves as useful as possible to the new dog in town, which was America. And so you find a lot of these security officers, a lot of these intelligence agents, colonial officers who, if they aren't advising the modern alphabet agencies directly, a lot of them got jobs in the new security agencies. A lot of them were absorbed into the Cold War architecture. A lot of them are still informing how the modern tactics that we use today are developed. And so with the new class of Africans that have been elevated to play this role, part of the bargain is we will let you guys run the country effectively. We will let you take a share of the wealth that we are extracting from these countries, but you have to keep these security relationships going. You have to continue to provide intelligence. You have to continue to be a security partner. If we tell you the Soviet Union or some country in the Middle East is a bad guy and we need to use your ports or your air bases or your intelligence to take on those fights, you do what we say. And as long as you can continue to do that, we will give you everything you need to suppress the local population. So the modern political class, the William Rutos of the more modern African states are playing the role that they were designed to play. And it's reaching its natural conclusion now as they're elevated as security partners for American projects with what we're seeing in Haiti and other places, that if they want to maintain control of these of their own local countries, they have to continue to be good partners to the American security apparatus.
Thank you very much. That was good, very lucid and explanatory. Thank you very much for doing that and being able to condense that like that.
I'm doing my best.
And so we're gonna move to Dr. Nyakundi.
Well said.
Thank you. I'm trying to get, and so just do your initial take. And I know it's all right if some of this information we're getting overlaps, because sometimes people hear something that jogs what they know and they want to add the context that they have. So can you point that more to him?
I believe I'm loud enough. First of all, thank you for having me. I would want to take the opportunity to appreciate the collaborating partners, the IPS, the 625 movement, and all the other partners. It's quite a pleasure being here, and this is quite insightful and important for me as a journalist, as a patriotic Kenyan and a Pan-Africanist. Allow me to start by agreeing with what my brother Luca and Valentine have said, to the extent that we are looking at a country and a state of the nation of Kenya that is broken and not broken at the same time. Seated outside looking inwards, you feel like Kenya is this progressive country, Kenya is this democracy, Kenya is one that has a leadership that is focused, that is visionary, but that is far from it when you actually get inside and look outside. So let me begin by painting the picture of what the country looks like. And we wouldn't have gathered here at a better time in terms of exemplifying what that picture looks like, other than on a day that we had a by-election in the country, which gives us a dress rehearsal of what we can look forward to in 2027. where the state and the ruling party is deploying its arsenal, it is militarization operation against the people, simply because there is the fear that the people are going to express themselves against the ruling party, that the ruling, the regime of the day will finally meet its ghosts by the people then saying that, we are tired. The oppression and the suppression in terms of heavy taxation, runaway corruption, police brutality, media control, infringement on fundamental rights, all that came to play today in the by-election in Ol Kalou. But then I think I have to give credit to the people of Ol Kalou, because they have demonstrated that when the people decide that they want to stand against an oppressive regime, they are going to do so. Despite the heavy deployment of, resources, voter treatment, and, police brutality against the people of Ol Kalou came out and voted, 86% in favor of the opposition, which tells you the picture. So that is the state of the nation that we have to deal with, where the government paints itself as friendly, a respecter of human rights to the outside world, but inward, you have media that is, gagged. You have suppression of freedoms. There is abductions. There is state-sponsored violence. What we are seeing in the country is a culture where the police and the security apparatus is working with goons. And in broad daylight, I think this week on Sunday, we saw more like what we have seen in Haiti. And those of us critical of the government have been saying, come on, were we sending our police to Haiti to benchmark? Because that is what we are seeing. So that is what we have, where the people given the responsibility to manage the affairs of the state are, instead of, doing statecraft, what they are doing is weaponizing the state against political opponents or perceived critics of the government. And that is what we are dealing with. Just to buttress, what Luca has said about how the continuation of the colonial system has been happening. What we have is a country where contracts are given, the political elite, there is a deliberate weakening of political and political parties, oversight institutions, and independent institutions which are established by the Constitution. And I'm going to give examples. One is you have a legislature that is at the beck and call of the executive. We are having the speakers of both houses at the national level, the Senate and the National Assembly, who are being cited for contempt of court for being partisan, for campaigning for the president, which is unheard of. I mean, as the head of the legislature, which is the oversight arm of government, you cannot have these individuals in charge or heading those institutions out there campaigning for the executive, out there doing the bidding for the executive. That is what we have. And the courts are being called upon to say, hey, these people are supposed to be non-partisan. At least they need to look like they are not partisan. But they are doing it with, brazen impunity, because, I mean, what are you going to do about it? And so there is that failure to recognize or realize that in the era of technology, in a country where 70% of the population is under the age of 25, we talk about 75% being under 35, under 35, but the most amazing thing is that actually 70% plus of the Kenyan population is under the age of 25. So in the era of technology, there is that failure to recognize that this is a population that has access to information in ways that we have not seen before. This is a population that has benefited from access to certain fundamental rights like education. We talk about the Kibaki generation. These are the children that woke up one day in 2003 and they had free education. They are now in that age where they are like, we went to school, so we know what we want. That is what they don't recognize. And that is why June 25th, 2024 is a turning point, is the modern day Saba that the current Gen Zs and, millennials are saying, look, we are fighting for our country. We want a government that will serve the people. We want a leadership that is accountable to us, and we are claiming our rights as citizens. We are not subjects. So, as I bring my remarks home on the state of the nation, so that then we can open it for other dimensions of this conversation, is that the fight back that we are seeing by the citizens is one of resilience, yet we are dealing with a systemic arrangement, if you like, where people in power are bent on creating an oligarchy without saying it. How are they doing it? Through corruption in capital-intensive infrastructure projects, through unexplained debt servicing, through, for instance, we have never seen before money laundering in the country. And I dare say that because we have the facts about that, where you have the building of high infrastructure projects, for instance, where the government gets to a point, it says, these individuals have grabbed or illegally acquired, public property, but we are going to look the other way because the head of state says, okay, if somebody stole, what we are going to do is let's sit and negotiate. That is coming from the highest office in the land. So you have a road that is being constructed where the previous administration did it for, I think, $1.5 billion. The new administration comes in, cancels that program, pays off a cancellation fee of equivalent of $70 million, and now reassigns that tender at $2 billion. I mean, that is what we are talking about. That is the creation of the oligarchy, in the sense that you want to give high capital-intensive infrastructure projects to people who will then revert this money, reinvest it in the management of the politics of the country, right, at the expense of service delivery to the people in terms of healthcare, in terms of education. Because enemy number one to the Kenyan administration today is an informed citizen. So one thing they have done is to break down the education system in such a way that it becomes a privilege of the few. And that is the reality of what we're dealing with, and that is how it is playing out. So ultimately, the Kenyan people are saying, and as we prepare for these elections, what we are saying is that Washington and, the West needs not ignore the voices of the people and listen to the bureaucrats and the kakistocratic regime that we have, which is creating this picture of, progressive respecter of rights and good governance, when in actual sense, if this government was working, then Kenyans would not be on the street at every opportunity. That is the message that Washington and other, foreign powers need to realize, and perhaps find alternative ways of engaging with the Kenyan people through the civil society organizations, through the different movements like the 625 movement and other civic entities that actually allow the voice of the people to be heard for what it is. Otherwise, we are staring at a 2007 moment that would actually get worse. And the Kofi Annan Foundation has already given those red flags and said there is 84% chance that Kenya, the elections next year will be violent like we have never seen before. So with those kinds of independent, reports ahead of time, we cannot have Washington and other Western powers trying to, endear themselves to the regime, unless what they want to do is to continue the extraction, and what they want to do is a breakdown of sanity and good political order in Kenya. That is the message that we want to pass, and very, very loudly and clearly. If they don't listen, then we would probably, like somebody has said, 2007, for those of you who have no context, Kenya had the worst post-election crisis in its history that required serious interventions for the country to get back on track. If it happens in 2027, I'm afraid Kenya might go the Somalia or Haiti way.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that I have to be the bearer of bad news in that way.
So Ashlyn still with us? I don't see. Okay, Ashlyn, we can go to you, Ashlyn. Then give us your analysis context. I wanted to know if you could talk to us about more also the broader geostrategic context. There's others we know. France is angling. There's just in general, we know that the global order, the Western global order, is dependent on Africa. It is a parasite on the well-being and the interest, the land, the resources, all that on Africa. And so that manifests itself in different ways. And what must be done about that is much more complicated and something we need to get into. What does it take for us? We know we can have a vision of what liberation looks like for the people on the continent of Africa and everywhere. The vision is, can be our goal. We want that. We want how we perceive and how we can define justice and peace and well-being as the objective. The question becomes, what is our theory of change? What does it take? What must transpire or happen for us to get from where we are now to that vision? And so, that's, I think, we want to bring this kind of thinking to the conversation. Hopefully, Comrade Ashlyn, you can, just lay out whatever you have around this. And it's okay if you, touch on some of the things you've heard already, whatever comments you may have about it.
Thank you so much, and greetings, comrades, friends. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. So I am happy to have listened to Val, Amayo, and Nyakundi for the analysis. And I'll start by saying that, we continue to gather at a critical historical juncture. And when we speak of Kenya, we speak of it at a crossroads. So we are not speaking metaphorically, but we are speaking of a material reality of our people. And the Kenyan state, it's a comprador instrument of neocolonialism. Comprador means that we have a particular class that is serving Western imperialism. So our state is compliant to the dictates of Western imperialism. It complies by hosting foreign military bases, by deepening debt dependency, and by suppressing its own people. The good thing is that even with such chronic conditions for our people, the Kenyan people, the workers, the peasantry, the oppressed, the revolutionary youth are defying this system. So they're rising against the cost of living, against land grabbing, against the political betrayal, against the brutality of the ruling class. And like Netfa said, this crossroad is not isolated to Kenya alone. It is part of a global crisis. So imperialism is in a state of, we call it advanced decay. And we are witnessing the sharpening of contradictions that bear the characteristics of a new global war. So having touched on this, I'd like to speak about what the party analyzes as, we call it the spark of World War III. So essentially, yes. So essentially, to understand this, we need to also understand the crisis of imperialism and the Third World War. So we are already living through a world war. It does not look like the 1914 or the 1939. That is the First and the Second World Wars. It is a hybrid world war, a multifaceted conflict which on economic, diplomatic, and military fronts simultaneously. So let me start by the Palestinian struggle. So this has been the heart of the contradiction. The genocide in Gaza is not a conflict. It is a colonial project of settler colonialism sustained by the direct military, financial, and diplomatic backing of the Zionist regime and the United States. So the West's support for Israel exposes the hypocrisy of their rules, or what they called crimes against humanity. So this is a war against the soul of humanity, and the compliance of African states to remain silent is a betrayal of our own anti-colonial history. Then also there is the proxy war in the Ukraine front. So the war in Ukraine is a proxy war driven by NATO expansionism. It is a war against Russia by the United States and its allies, using Ukrainian blood and territory. So the goal is to weaken a rival power while we oppose all wars of imperialist aggression. We recognize that this conflict is fundamentally a result of the US and NATO's encirclement strategy. So it is very calculated. Then also there is the battle for energy and hegemony in West Asia, the Iranian war. So Iran has been under siege. The US uses sanctions and military threats to strangle a nation that refuses to bow to Western financial dominance and imperialism. So the struggle in the Persian Gulf is not about democracy. It is about controlling the oil that powers the global economy and reinforcing the dominance of the US dollar. Then we go to Asia. So the South China Sea and the Taiwan. The US is using China threat narrative to justify a massive military buildup in Asia. So the South China Sea is being militarized to encircle China, as a rising alternative power with socialist characteristics. So also the Taiwan issue is the most dangerous flashpoint for us because the US violates its own. So they'll continue to weaponize propaganda against China, saying one China policy to sell arms and to provoke the People's Republic of China. And for us, this is a deliberate attempt to start a hot war in Asia, aiming to contain the rise of the global south. In Africa also, we have a number of imperialist wars. When you look at the Sahel region, when you go to the DR Congo, here in the Horn of Africa, have the ongoing war in Sudan. We have we call them imperialist wars in multiple fronts across the continent. And these wars are fueled by the urge and the thirst for resource extraction. The Western imperialists are more concerned with our cobalt, our gold, our oil. They don't really care about, the suffering, the misery of our people. So France, US, UK are locked in a new scramble for Africa, you know. And even with the kind of war that the wars that they're advancing on the continent, we see resistance in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, represents a rupture in the long chains of being contained by French imperialism. So these countries have stood firm to kick out French military installations, and they continue to reclaim sovereignty. So for us, this is a direct blow to the imperialist order. And even while we welcome any opposition to war, we must critically analyze the nature of the peace movements in the West. So it is easier for them to say that maybe Africa is a hub of war, but they don't really understand the concrete conditions here. So many of these anti-war movements in US, in Europe, suffer from what we term as bourgeoisie pacifism. They oppose war because it is bad or it's expensive, but they do not oppose the system that creates war. So they fail to identify capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism as the root causes of the wars in multiple fronts. Again, these movements often refuse to take a clear stand on different crises, the war crisis, claiming that maybe both sides are bad, or they focus exclusively on the suffering of maybe the Palestinian civilians, while refusing to condemn the Zionist state's existence in the same breath that they criticize Hamas. So this selective neutrality is actually a form of compliance, being complicit. So it allows the imperialist states to maintain its moral authority while conducting its chronic operations. So for us, we continue to spearhead the spirit of proletarian internationalism. We say the only genuine path forward is to defeat imperialist bourgeoisies in each country. So we continue to urge our comrades, our friends in the global north. They must agitate for their own government to stop funding wars and to dismantle the military bases that shock the world. We reject peace at any price in favor of peace through revolution. So essentially, I am saying that the only path forward is revolution. And I also wanted to speak a bit about Kenya. So if I am allowed, I could.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So to understand the defiance of the people, we must first understand the material conditions that forge it. So the Kenyan working class is under siege, and this siege is by design. Imperialism has systematically stunted Kenya's industrial development. The so-called industrial zones in Nairobi and other urban centers are not hubs for national industrializations. They are warehouses, distribution centers, and import-oriented storage networks for foreign goods. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is not accidental, because imperialism prevents the emergence of a genuine national capacity capable of independent industrial formation. So it instead enforces dependency, fragments production, and redirects accumulation into trade, real estate, and financial speculation. And the result is that the working class in Kenya is numerically thin, constrained, and weakened. So industries are weak or absent. Manufacturing has been dismantled, and the working class that exists is precariously employed or casually hired or ruthlessly exploited in the country. And this also goes to majority of our rural masses. The same fate is on them. While the working class is relatively thin, more than 70% of the Kenyan people are pushed into the rural hinterland, or what we term as rural barbarism. And this is not a return to tradition. It is forced expulsion from a formal economy. And in the countryside, exploitation takes layered and brutal forms. The first one is market exploitation. So you'll get that our peasants are forced to sell their produce at artificially low prices and buy essentials at inflated rates. Then also there is usury. So the peasantry is chained in this circle of debt. So borrowing at exploitative rates to plant only to only repay with so much harvest. For instance, when you go to rural Kenya, you'll get that any struggling family, like everything in the house, whether it's solar panels, whether it's a TV, it's a radio, all of them are on loans. So they give you a solar panel to light your house, but they say you can pay it slowly. So this is how usury manifests in the village. And so slowly means they pay in installments, and it means that if this farmer or if this woman had maybe 10,000 to buy the solar panel, she'll end up paying for that solar panel at around 50,000 because she did not have the cash to actually purchase that good with ready money. And also there is rent in kind and rent in labor. So you'll get that landlords and local elites strip the harvest before the family can eat. So the loans I am speaking about is not just on the material possession. Even seeds, rent in labor is the unpaid toil is extracted from our rural poor people. And also we have rent in money. Cash rents tighten the grip of landlords and comprador elites. So the peasant steals but does not own. He produces but does not control. He lives but does not advance. He's always in that circle of usury, that circle of poverty. And this is not backwardness by accident. It is backwardness maintained and imposed by the system that keeps the masses of our people weak and divided. But even with this reality, we say that the peasantry is the most decisive force. And also the most visible and physical force. So the peasantry, it is vast and enduring, and it constitutes the physical force of the revolution. It is the reservoir of energy, the great mass that, when organized and led by the working class, can sweep away the old order and bring dignity to our people. So without the peasantry in Kenya, there is no revolution. Without the peasantry, armed with consciousness and organization. There is no force that can stand in the way. So we also recognize the role of the peasantry in the revolution. So to just speak a little bit about why we need to advance the defiance. I wanted to touch a little bit on what has been said on abductions, on police brutality. So when the people begin to build their own power, the enemy begins to sharpen his own knives. So abductions by the neocolonial states are not random acts of cruelty. They are calculated instruments of class. They are sharpened flanks of the regime, desperate to maintain power in the face of growing popular discontent and revolutionary consciousness. So I'll say that amidst the kind of struggles you've had, the immense killing, the progressive protests in the streets, the defiance that our people have shown, we must congratulate them for the kind of gains that they have made. I know it's not enough, but the masses of our people at the moment are more charged and they're ready to, to fight. And they understand why they are fighting. It's easier to just say that land belongs to those who till, but that is not our reality. I think majority of our people have embraced understanding what it means to organize themselves, what it means to educate themselves, for them to challenge a system that they are aware of. So with that, Comrade Netfa, I'm happy to leave it at there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. So we're going to move the question and answer. And the people online, I don't know how many people we got online, but there's a question and answer feature on the webinar, correct? And so we want to ask you to use that for your questions. Put in the questions there, and then we'll ask our colleague Emma to field the questions here in the room. Raise your hand, and you can. And then I think that is like a microphone that people should. But I don't know if you have to switch to it so that everyone online. I'll repeat the questions in case people can't hear. There's a little thing over there that people hear. And I'm going to take the prerogative to ask the first question. It's going to be
Nefta, I just wanted to add something to what Ashlyn has said. She talked about the crisis of imperialism, and it just provoked a thought in me about what just happened this week in Washington, where Secretary Rubio launched an anti-ICC campaign by the United States government, where he says they now want to systemically and structurally weaken the International Criminal Court by lobbying through different diplomatic strategies, so that the signatory or states parties to the Rome Statute that establishes the ICC then withdraw from the Rome Statute. And from a Pan-African's point of view, where we have the bad governance and, the excesses by governments, where individuals, abuse power against the people, the ICC has been, that last line of defense for the people in situations where there is human rights abuses, like we saw in Kenya, like we've seen in many different countries. So when Washington then leads this offensive against the ICC, what it is saying is that it emboldens the dictators and oppressors of the people, such that the people then are left to their own devices, and instead of the judicial international law system that brings these dictators and other oppressors to account, then the Western powers and imperialists now become the people or the systems that now intervene in situations where the people then need to hold people into account. Because if you look at the case of Kenya, for instance, where the people don't have confidence in the judiciary, the ICC becomes where then we look up to. So when that breakdown of the international law and order becomes what Washington is driving, then for those of us who believe that we live in a global village and the era of technology opens it up for us to enforce good governance and democracy for the people, is a very worrying concern. And that speaks to this crisis of imperialism. The imperialists are afraid that when the people finally take up and exercise their power, their puppets in the name of presidents and prime ministers and leaders are going to be rendered powerless, and therefore the extractive strategy and repatriation of resources from Africa and the developing world, as it were, is at risk. The other thing that I just want to add on is on the economic suppression, where she talked about the industrial hubs that were established in the 60s and the 70s at the advent of African independence, which were meant to be, hubs where job creation and economic empowerment of the people would happen. There is a systemic stunting of the growth of the industrial system in Africa, like stillbirthing of the innovation of the country, so that the people depend on handouts, the people depend on what the oligarchs are giving to them as a way of control, because people who are economically empowered through job creation and industrialization as a way of creating jobs are a threat to the dictatorship. And that is something that, again, we are saying. And again, I think last week we had a session with the USTDA on what it is doing with, Africa and, partnership as opposed to aid, the America First approach. And this is one area that I asked, acting director Hardy, that what exactly are they doing in a way that instead of having all these Western companies, the institutions, and Luca alluded to that, going into Africa and getting the, capital-intensive infrastructure projects, how do you then make sure that the governments are speaking for their people, for their nascent companies to get the capacity and the power to be able to be the ones doing those projects instead of giving them to foreign companies? And I didn't quite get an answer to that because it is said that there's a delegation coming to the US to be able to look into this and all that. So that I think that is a very important point that Ashley put forward, and I wanted to put it in that context.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it. I don't mean to sound, but I might have a little pushback, particularly on the first point of the ICC. If we're understanding, because the ICC is not really a credible institution, and argument can be made that it's really used actually to bully the global South, and that the biggest violators of human rights and crimes against humanity face impunity in the ICC. They never go up to the ICC. And so while some of them might be looking at the ICC and trying to, like within the Trump administration and Rubio doing that, even if the ICC stays intact, the comprador classes in Africa or anywhere else, really, it's not a tool that really does anything about that strategic or that systemic issue that we have in terms of its neocolonialism. And even the other thing where you're saying, I don't want to, I want to open it up too, but even the latter point you made, this is also neocolonialism. This is really where the outward trappings of independence and all of that exists in Africa or anyplace else. But then the system maintains really the colonial arrangement that extracts everything from from these lands and these countries, and also guides the politics and the economies of the countries. But all of everything else looks like it's independent and governed by so it is to be expected that question you asked would not be answered, because this is an agent of neocolonialism, an agent of upholding the global order that we see right now. But I wanted to ask, go ahead, you were going to say something?
Yeah, if I could add on that point briefly, and it's not to disagree necessarily, but I agree that the ICC is largely a theater of hypocrisy. I don't believe that the path forward for working populations coming out of these countries is to appeal to these multilateral institutions that have a long history of failing working people from delivering relief to them. I actually think the question is, in the question of what is to be done, we have to be reflecting on who our friends are and who our actual enemies are, who our opponents are in the fight for what we're looking for. And the friends of the working people in countries like ours is working people in countries like this. Because ultimately, who is footing the bill for these security relationships? Who is footing the bill for these bases? It is you. It is you, the American taxpayer, who pays for that. And I think one of the amazing things about this moment in time is my day job is in democratic politics. And I can tell you 3 or 4 years ago, to talk about Gaza was something that was an absolute no-go for all democratic principles. But because of the pressure of a class here that they have to be more responsive to, their conversation is changing, and they're desperate to find different ways to engage that relationship. But if it gets too hot, they're going to drop it and adopt a different posture. So I think the natural extension of that is for working class people in countries like this to broaden that conversation to all the places where your tax dollars are going to things that might benefit that class here, or the political class back home, that but don't benefit you at all. And there are laws on the books that if these hypocrisies and contradictions weren't so brazen, could be enforced. If Leahy laws were applied, American taxpayer dollars should never be used to fund weapons that are being used to commit human rights abuses in any other country. That is a law on the books right now. So can we use pressure points like that to expand the conversation of where do we go from? We need to stop what is going on in Gaza, but we need to stop what is going on in every other country where a political class is using those weapons, American-funded weapons, to hurt working people in those countries.
Just
Well, hold on, let's
yeah. Oh, okay.
Well, I wanted to open it up, and these things can be, you can add the stuff into the comment, into the responses, if we can work that in, because I don't want to be late, put off opening up the question and answer. I wanted to ask Ashlyn, though, about the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism that took place in Nairobi. There were, just to give context, and Ashlyn, if you can fill in more, that in May, France came to Kenya holding its Africa Forward Summit. They called it first France Africa Summit, then they called it Africa Forward Summit, and it's basically, well, I'll let Ashlyn do it, but basically France trying to find other ways to maintain its relationship, exploitative imperialist relationship, in my view, with Africa, and that Ashlyn and the other organizers organized a a counter summit, the Pan-Africanist Summit Against Imperialism in Africa. I was able to attend then, and I think there's a lot of information they have that's instructive about what she's even talking about in terms of the crisis, the crisis of the system and how it's playing out, and what it's actually doing in Kenya, those policies that are enacted, and why now we have to look at, one of the things that's instructive is to look at France's maneuvers toward East Africa from the West Africa. Can you just give us a little bit, because we want to open it up about that, the significance of those geostrategic developments?
So the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism, PASAI, was convened in Nairobi, Kenya, on the May 11th and 12th, 2026, as a direct counteroffensive to the France Africa Summit, rebranded as Africa Forward Summit. And it was organized by the Communist Party Marxist Kenya in collaboration with a broad coalition of anti-imperialist forces, both on the continent and outside. And for us, this represented a significant political intervention in the continental struggles against neocolonialism. And just to give context a bit, so the Africa Forward Summit, co-hosted by President William Ruto and French President Emmanuel, was identified by this committee as, can you hear me?
Yes, you froze for a minute, but we can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
For a second. Rather.
Yes. So I was saying that the African Forward Summit, hosted by William Ruto and Emmanuel Macron, we identified it as an imperialist recolonization disguised behind the mask of environmental diplomacy and financial reform. Because the summit's strategic significance was rooted in France's military retreat from the Sahel region. Because we understand that we have had popular uprising by the patriotic sections of the military regimes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, who have expelled French troops and their subsequent installations in the Sahel, and they were looking for a beachhead to now designate these troops and this let me say the military bases. And they thought, like, it has been reinforced on this platform that Kenya was declared a major non-NATO ally. So having that identity, they thought East Africa, Kenya will be the best entry point to now advance French imperialism, because imperialism doesn't learn. It's a bad student. Every time you kick it out, it looks for very cunning ways to navigate itself through the continent. So for us, Pasai emerged from the pain, the misery of our people. And the objectives for this counter summit was to expose the imperialist nature of France Africa Summit and the neo-colonial entanglements that we are in. And it was to forge a Pasai also was to defend the Kenyan and the African progressive forces from state repression, because even with the Defiance, a lot of revolutionary, of socialist, of anti-imperialist, and also in all progressive organizations have faced severe suppressions in their different countries. For us also, it was to build enduring anti-imperialist networks, and we adapted the Nairobi Declaration from below, which was charting people's path to sovereignty. And something that I did not mention earlier, but it will be amazing to mention, is that as an organization, we've tried to understand the nature and character of our struggle. And we have declared that we need to advance what we term as the National Democratic Revolution. And the NDR, National Democratic Revolution, basically represents a critical historical responsibility and will, seeking to unite various classes in a concerted effort to dismantle the primary class enemy, or the enemies of our people. And we acknowledge the necessity of a united front to confront and overcome the systemic oppression and exploitation of our people. So NDR basically means It's the struggle for national democracy through united action to defeat the primary enemy and initiate the process for national reconstruction. So it is the fight for sovereignty, because central to the revolutionary path is understanding that economic independence is essential for achieving sovereignty. And so we wanted the masses of our people to not just speak of sovereignty, because Kenya is not a sovereign state. Because looking at who owns land, who controls our industries, our companies, it's one particular class, the leeching class, the our enemies, the ruling class that continues to subjugate and subordinate our people at the expense of them making more profit and entertaining, Western imperialism. So it is important to continue to organize capacity and develop new allies in multiple fronts. So Pasai was mainly on that, but I could go more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me open really because I don't want to stop. I know people have questions, and I saw your hand first. And there's some online. Were you showing me like a bunch of online questions? And if I can ask you to read them for us, and but let me go to you first, if you don't mind. And
yeah, thank you for being here, sharing so much knowledge. I was wondering whether anyone could give a quick rundown on the role that the Kenyan government plays in this NATO security complex and the position that Kenya has in the East African geopolitical landscape and the relations with neighboring governments and neighboring conflicts.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask people in the chat and the online, did you hear that question or do I need to play? I mean, he basically asked what role the Kenyan government is playing in the NATO security complex. And there was a little bit more to that, but yeah.
You can go.
I'm happy to get into that. So historically, once the Soviet Union collapsed and America is reassessing its relationships with these other countries, it made room for other subordinate interests to get to the top of the list. Like, let's see some democratic reforms, because that's a tool that we can use to push back against other enemies that we want to see open
I'm gonna
up.
have to ask people online to mute until you can speak, because I'm hearing some feedback. Sorry about that.
No problem. In the interest of getting maybe China to open up their economy, they frame it in terms of democratic governance, but that has spillover effects for countries like Kenya, where we see what at that time is a single party state that, had whatever perceived slight was not sufficiently compliant, now being forced to open up for democratic reforms. And that becomes one of the specifications now they attach to the new sets of loans, as part of a broader process, a broader regime that they're imposing globally. With Kenya specifically, that changes with the rise of Al-Qaeda, and the 1998 bombing was a very dramatic moment when the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi was bombed. And the relationship starts to evolve where they see Kenya as a very important ally in counterterrorism. And counterterrorism has a rich provenance, inheritance from counterinsurgency that I was describing earlier with the during colonial administrations, where they start to look the other way and they say, like, okay, as long as you can continue to be a platform for us to launch our broader wars against there are spillovers of what are happening in the Middle East. Somalia is a theater for that. The Horn of Africa is a theater for that. Where the African elite learn that if they can position themselves as useful to American interests in its broader proxy wars, then they have more leeway to do whatever they want back home. And so their security relationship begins to evolve from the Moi administration onward. This is in 1990s onward. The bombing was a catalyzing event for that. But as the system is being tested again, our current president, William Ruto, has accelerated that relationship dramatically. I remember this interview I saw of Marco Rubio being asked about the Haiti mission in Kenya, and he said something to the effect like, "God bless yourselves." Like, who on earth would take that death march? Who would take that sort of mission to go do something so foolhardy, like send their own soldiers to carry out this project that we've struggled with in that area. So who would take on an Ebola facility within their country? It's these that our ability to so sufficiently prostrate ourselves to American interests. The reward for that is to be elevated in the security dimension. This again, like countries like Egypt used to hold this place, but in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya is working hard to earn that distinction for how can we make ourselves sufficiently useful to American interests. And what they get in exchange is all sorts of security grants to protect. They open new bases, Camp Simba, an expansion of existing bases. But in turn, they get further security grants. They get further access to frontline weapons that other lower tiered partners get. They get access to further tools of surveillance to be able to push back against, and the benefit for the African political class in that is these are tools that they can now use to suppress their local populations.
Can I add something on?
Yes, please.
For those who don't know, so last year, December 4th, Kenya and the United States got into an agreement called the American First Global Health Strategy, which Marco Rubio signed, and at least $2.5 million was going to be given to Kenya for a period of 5 years to fund this project. And when you hear Lucas speak about having an Ebola facility in Kenya that is going to host Americans who have been infected with Ebola in Kenya, but Kenyans cannot access it, is due to this bill that was signed last year. And Kenya was the first country to actually sign this agreement.
Mhm.
And I think, sorry,
Oh.
go on, Van. Sorry.
I'll answer it later. I'll jump on it later, but it's more pertaining the elections coming up.
What was the name of the bill? Can someone ask?
The American First Global Health Strategy. I believe that's the name.
It's a partnership
It's a
agreement.
partnership.
But I think what I wanted to add to what the non-NATO status that Kenya got has got to do with the counterterrorism aspect that Luca has spoken about. But I think beyond that, the reason why, first of all, there is an opaque kind of revelation about what those bilateral relations really are about. And you can tell from what the Cabinet Secretary for Health said about what Val has talked about, the strategic America First Health collaboration. The CES was actually saying Kenyans don't have the capacity to understand what this is all about. So the main motivation, the incentive, again speaks to this, the leadership of the country, President William Ruto, specifically in this case, is about him getting elevated to a situation where he has the tools and the system which he can then use to abuse citizens whenever there is an uprising or whenever there is pressure against his administration. That is the main incentive, because if you ask anybody today, nobody really understands what this non-NATO ally really means for a country that is not even anywhere close to Europe, a country that does not come anywhere close to being a threat or being threatened by those interests by the NATO countries. So really it is about using those tools, the privileged access to some of these weapons and artillery, to use it against its own citizens whenever they demand for better in terms of citizens' rights to have services from a government.
Can I add something? And just to add on what Milton said, and I believe that is why when it comes to Kenya and Sudan, Kenya, as we all know, has been giving weapons to Sudan supplying weapons to continue with the genocide in Sudan, and there has been no accountability. Nobody is calling it out, and having this partnership and having this power in this side of the Horn of Africa, the state of Kenya can actually do whatever it pleases in Sudan or even the Congo.
Mm-hmm. And I see hands going up, and I know there's stuff a number of things online too. How many can we do 3? How many of them are online? Oh, just 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's do. Thank you for doing.
I try to answer some of them, but not in their
A
entirety.
few of them. Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
we want to share it though. We didn't want it to be answered like that on the, we want people to be able to speak it loud, so the people in the room here also. Can you scroll up to the first one? How is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, the first one is, and I can see where Valentine tried to answer some. Per my understanding of the Kenya political environment, the Gen Z movement has not garnered the political power to drive change, protesting, but not organizing, leaderless to its detriment. What is your assessment of this statement? And Valentine Rahai Joseph, we have not garnered political power per se in terms of having gens or young people run for office. However, our political power will be exercised through voting. Yet young Kenyans launched the Niko Kadi movement, where young people are registered to vote in large numbers. We will try to answer this in depth. And then go down a little, and Jibo says, what is the voting age in Kenya? Can people in the rural areas vote? Is electoral politics a viable strategy? While Kenya is a comprador state, are there also still British settlers who own land? And then, Valentine. Okay.
Can I get into that? Yeah. So the voting age in Kenya right now is 18. People in rural areas of Kenya can vote. However, a lot has been happening in these rural areas. Dr. Milton was talking about a town called Olkalau that had its primaries. In this current dispensation, there's been a lot of impunity in that area. We're looking at the government funneling money into these election campaigns through different ways. For example, the government got a lot of mattresses and was giving the mattresses to the locals, mattresses that could have actually gone to hospitals that actually needed these mattresses, as a form of bribing the citizens of this area to vote for their viable candidate. On top of that, the government was collecting voter information, and I believe they want to use this as a form of intimidation to figure out, and I don't know how they want to do this in terms of time, to figure out who voted for who, right? Which is extremely insane. And some of these leaders, instead of focusing on what needs to be focused on when we're talking about permanent secretaries or cabinet secretaries being involved in local politics because they feel like this is very important, instead of using that time to actually work for the rural people of Kenya. And one thing that has actually been coming up a lot is goonism, where the government and also the opposition leaders are hiring or are incubating young people, making them goons with the hope that these people will fight their battles for them. And we've seen in countries like Haiti and some of these countries that have had this sort of goonism, where this goonism becomes sort of militias. And this is why this is very detrimental. When Dr. Milton was talking and saying that next year might actually be very, very, it might be a bloody situation in Kenya if all this is not mitigated right now, because the political class, which is fighting amongst themselves, is using goonism and is using tribalism to try and get Kenyans to fight against each other so that they can continue enjoying the benefits that comes with the power that they have.
Okay.
To the last question that Jibo was asking about British settlers, yes, there are many British settlers who own a lot of farmland in Kenya. We have one farmland which is really big, known as the Delamere Company, that makes a lot of juices. But the one thing that I've noticed that has been happening to Kenyans with this farmland is where Kenyans are not allowed. You'll see like a Kenyan, maybe for instance, they pass by or close by someone's farmland and they are gunned down by these British settlers or killed because they are apparently trespassing, even though they were not. And foreigners or foreign institutions coming to Kenya, taking a lot of farmland, saying that taking a lot of land in the name of conservancies and kicking out Kenyans from their own land, or even paying them to as little as nothing or carbon credits. And actually nothing has been happening to them. I don't know if Ashley, being on the ground, has more insight about this particular topic, but that is what has been happening in Kenya today. There's been no accountability. In Kenya right now, the rich continue to benefit from the judicial system, and oh, unto you, if you are poor, that means you cannot bribe the judicial system.
Thank you. Ashley, did you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to respond to a few things. Allow me go back to the first question. Just quickly, I won't take time. On that question, the role of Kenyan government in NATO security. I wanted to say that across East Africa, the ruling classes are increasingly integrating into a shared neocolonial security architecture. And this model is from Western government or Western imperialist government. So intelligence is exchanged between states, security forces coordinated across borders, repressive methods are shared and replicated. So in practice, this is meant, or this is being built so as to suppress protest movements, strikes, popular uprising, and maintain stability in the countries. And we think the regional coordinator or the regional security installation is Kenya at the moment. So the oppressed people of our countries are increasingly being treated as a regional threat by the interconnected regimes acting in unison to defend the system. For instance, during the Gen Z uprising, we had special units from Uganda in the streets as plainclothes police. And we cannot trace them because they did what they did in the streets. We've been told about Sudan. So in Kenya, we don't have any money. We have fictitious money because the fictitious money is from the kind of the security installation, the kind of coordination we are helping to do to advance the oppression and the exploitation of the working and the poor people, not just in Kenya, but in Sudan, Uganda, and different countries. Also, there is something called the DC. I'm not sure if we've heard of this. So DSA is basically defense cooperation agreement. And I think Kenya at the moment is on its eighth DSA that it signed with France. And that's why for us, we don't think that the France-Africa Summit was essentially a diplomatic forum. It was, an event to make sure that they solidify the military installations. So that is how Kenya has been able to play a role in terms of, the growing foreign military bases on the continent and the networks, the imperialist security networks in different countries. Also on elections. I like to say that in Kenya, the youth agenda has increasingly dominated the political scene, especially during elections, because youth continue to bear the heaviest burdens of systemic crisis. And the youth continue to be conditioned that elections must only adhere to the doctrine of tyranny of numbers. And, apart from being used as conduits for ethnic political violence, for handouts, they themselves are nothing but mere elections statistics for tilling electoral results among the pro-capitalist ruling classes. So the oppression will continue. Whether we can never change the system through the ballot. Basically, that is what I want to reinforce. And the bourgeoisie elections in our country are bereft of ideological struggle. They reduce the masses of our youth into objects for rubber stamping successive oppressive regimes in Kenya time and again. Since 1992, during the multi-party victory for the country, we've done elections. But have elections won anything for our people? Do we see gains? Can we say that there is something that it's worth celebrating? Every election we lose people. Every election there is rigging. So essentially, elections cannot revolutionize the conditions, the harsh capitalist offensive, the growing contradictions of our people. But election is just a tactic to mitigate the bad governance, the corruption and everything. But sold to this is advancing what we term as the class warfare. And it's, organizing the subjective and objective conditions for a revolution. In as much as we are participating in elections, let's prepare the ground for people to organize themselves and reign on these oppressive governments. Yes, I think, yeah, I've responded to, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Just a few hands here. And I want to, you didn't have your hand up? You did? So you had first, there's 3 hands. So
I have several questions. You talked about conservation. I would like more information on carbon credit. Could someone also talk about the UK Armed Forces training camps in Kenya, how that's affecting many kids? I would like someone to talk to us about seeds and farming in Kenya, how that's affecting the community. And then the experiment of devolution, is it working?
Wow, that's a lot. No, it's good. These are all good questions too. But I don't know how to. I want to make sure people online heard, but I don't know if I can say everything you said. Can you ask people in the chat or ask them to put in the chat? They can hear me. If you heard that question, if you heard those questions, say, let us know. And then I don't have to repeat it. Can you repeat that? I knew that was going to happen. So maybe let's just do this. I'm sorry to ask you to do this. I don't know how to make that thing work over there, but that should, if that works. Can you choose it?
Yeah, I can.
You can choose that?
Oh, it's really quiet.
Oh, is it? Okay, we'll use that right now.
Okay. Okay, I think we were talking about conservation. I needed to know more about the carbon credit. In response to that, the next question was about seeds and farming in Kenya, how seeds being now managed or controlled, how that's affecting the communities in Kenya. And then devolution experiment, is it working or not? Oh yeah, okay. The UK Armed Force training program, how is that affecting the communities or the community where they are in terms of the abuse.
Oh, the abuse. So there was a lot of questions we should try to get to, and we got two more, but we have not that much time left. So I'm gonna have to ask this, point to people to answer that and then be really, really concise. I'd like to get to the last two questions that are in the room. Who can
Mine is related to military bases, actually. They say that
Maybe we could
it's an
take the
ongoing
questions and
long-term.
then,
What's the difference
we
between
can take the
Africa
questions, we note them down, then we
Kenya's
can
always
respond.
had military
take the
bases?
other questions too?
Yeah, take all the.
Because I wanted people on so you're suggesting we take the last two questions too,
Yeah,
and
we
then
take
and
them
them
and
all.
then we can.
Okay,
respond.
if you mind stepping up here so the people online can hear the question? Because I'd like that's only fair to them to hear what's being asked.
First of all, I want to thank all the panelists for coming. I have a quick comment and then two questions. My first comment was for Dr. Nyankundi. When you described the political corruption, to me, it was very reminiscent of what John Perkins talked about in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So I don't know if that was something that crossed your mind. My first question for you is, with what happened with African Stream, was there any cooperation between the Kenyan government and Secretary of State Blinken? And then also with what you've talked about, are you concerned, and Ashlyn as well, and Valentine, for your safety, being a journalist, moving around, exposing this stuff? And then my other question for Luca, with your experience here in the Democratic Party in DC, especially with your activist leanings, how have you been able to maneuver in what the establishment kind of the way it functions here in DC politics?
Thank you. Your name. Do you want? Can you come up? Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about what the next steps are in terms of international policy, especially with the growth of sort of multilateral agreements in the Sahel with Russia and China. Could these countries possibly play a progressive role? Or considering their other forms of involvement in Africa, such as I believe both China and Russia have supported or like help facilitate the genocide in Sudan in various ways. And so I was sort of wondering, like, broadly, how could these countries be sorry, to what extent could they be progressive, or should they be treated with skepticism? And then furthermore, about China's involvement in Kenya with investment and their broader Belt and Road Initiative. I was wondering if those could be useful in weaning off of Western imperialism, or if they reproduce the same conditions and relations.
Good question. All right, I'm gonna ask you. I don't know if y'all can be brief. Oh Lord. Oh, come on.
What books would be recommended? What recent history that might be
And-
like slow poison Uganda?
Yeah.
So if you can recommend some books in your answers. There's a lot of questions that it'd be good to be able to field each one to a particular person and let them handle it. But I don't remember all the questions like that. And yours were directed to people. That was very helpful. Thank you for doing that. I don't even know where to begin with that. So does anyone, Ashlyn, do you have any or even let's go to Valentine first. Are there any questions that you heard that you would like to address, and at least is there one question that you heard that you would like to address? And
Yeah, I believe someone asked about seeds. So under the Seed and Plant Variety Act, sharing, saving, selling uncertified indigenous seeds was punishable. It was a law that was trying to be passed that was punishable by 2 years in prison or fined heavily. Now, imagine in Kenya, people have been farming all their lives. And now comes these politicians who are being paid by global companies. I believe one of them, I don't quite remember the name, but Monsanto, and one of them was Monsanto and many other organizations who have been pushing their policies through Kenyan members of parliament to pass draconian bills like this. There's also been a strong push of GMOs in Kenya, where they want farmers to plant GMOs. And this is actually very risky because it reduces the autonomy of farmers and independence of farmers when you have your food being controlled. But last year, the court ruled in favor of the farmers who had been backed by the Seed Savers Network and Greenpeace Africa in their favor, and that law was taken out. So Kenyans can actually now share their seeds like they have been for centuries. The other question that I believe was asked was about conservancies. So in Kenya, when it comes to land, many of these people or Kenyans who have owned land, especially in the rural areas, their land was not officially registered under the Community Land Act of Kenya, because most of the land over time has been passed from one generation to another generation. So there's been a huge gap because there's no legal title holder. So this has left a door for outside actors to come into the country and tell the community that they are negotiating carbon or conservancy deals over the land without people living on it or having any legal standing to object. Also, we also have to remember when it comes to rural areas, literacy levels are not as high as they are in urban areas. And one thing is, once the land is under conservancy control, the carbon that is stored, it gets certified as and sold as offset credits to corporations, but Kenyans per se in these communal lands are not benefiting. And these actors have also used this opportunity to get these communities outside of their ancestral lands. For example, there was a case a long time ago in Isiolo, I believe, where the community took this land, where this organization took the land and kicked out the natives there. I will actually refer you to, there's a Kenyan lady, her name is, if you can write it down, whoever asked this question, her name is Lynn Ngoge, and she has a series about what these conservancies are doing, where she interviews the local people, and there's a sitting within the local people of those communities to explain their atrocities that have been done to them. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but yeah.
Just spelled that last name,
Ngugi.
Okay, and then let's. We're not going to
can
get
go
any
next.
more on the online question. I'm sorry, because we're going to have to wrap. But so that we can only deal with the ones we have now. Oh, actually, you wanted to weigh in?
Yes, I wanted to speak about the carbon credits just a little.
Good.
Okay. So also the France Africa Summit,
Oh yeah.
The reason why it was in Kenya, it mainly concerned itself with something they termed as carbon offset. And maybe I can speak why carbon offset is a non-solution for not only Kenyan people, but the African countries. So they are, how do I put it? So the summit was set to use the most popular way to address the so-called climate crisis. And this is only on paper. When you go to the ground, there is nothing happening to reduce emission of greenhouse gases that causes global warming. And the greenhouse gases like carbon are byproducts of the burning of fossil fuels by vehicles and industries. So strategies such as carbon offset are touted by big businesses as solution to the climate crisis. And in this scheme, big businesses, mostly from the West, buy carbon credits from underdeveloped countries by investing in climate mitigation and adaptation strategies such as tree planting or other conservation measures. And this business will then use the said carbon credits to continue polluting the environment in their own countries and consequently the planet itself. So this practice violates the climate justice principle of, the common by differentiated responsibility, where all nations share a common obligation to address climate change, but the scale and nature of that responsibility differ based on their capacities, resources, and historical impacts. So in Africa, let me say, so in the African continent, the race for green space or green spaces and carbon offset has led to more land grabs of our arid land and large areas. So the so-called green projects incentivize, massive land grabs on our people. And I can give cases that we were able to analyze during the summit here in Nairobi. So key cases of land grabs linked to carbon offsets and green mining projects. The first one is in Kenya, a place called Kajiado. So just to give a small basis is that the Oldonyoike group ranch community greatly resisted carbon offsets projects that threatened to displace these indigenous people. So companies like CarbonSolve and Soil for the Future are accused of trying to acquire these lands without free, prior, or informed consent or consultation from this community. And also there is the Dubai-based company Blue Carbon, which has acquired land rights for carbon offsets projects, significantly affecting pastoralist communities like the Ogiek, who have been forced to relocate without consent. And the Blue Carbon targets large land across several African nations and often ignoring the rights of local inhabitants. Then also when you go to the Congo Basin, that is in the DRC, we have reports that identify 71 carbon projects covering nearly 113 million hectares of land. So many carbon offset deals are entered without community consent, repeating, let's say, a historic pattern of land exploitation and denying local community benefits. So you get that indigenous communities, and for DR Congo, it's particularly the Baka people, they have faced severe encroachments due to the establishment of the conservation areas like, it's called the Mesok Dutch. Maybe it's not the correct pronunciation, but essentially large-scale land acquisitions have been recorded with significant overlap with the indigenous lands. So resulting to displacement of our people, loss of access to vital resources, and dispossession essentially. So I could go on to Liberia, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia. So those reports are there on land grabs. And also quickly, I wanted to speak about China, to respond to the question of China. The claim that China is the new colonial power in Africa is a narrative largely driven by Western imperialism, think tanks, and, the bourgeoisie media outlets. And in as much as there is mismatch in this perspective, but we continue to see increasingly more different perspective across Africa. So essentially, They term this as patronizing, simplistic, and deeply hypocritical, particularly given that the Western powers have for a long time exploited us through the structural adjustment programs, which economically exploited our people, intensified neocolonial subjugation, climate injustice, and underdeveloped the continent. And we must clarify that we see a lot of opportunity with the Chinese finance capital on the continent. Unlike the IMF and World Bank, conditionalities, austerity measures, and finance on the continent. So I'd say that the partnership between China and Africa at large has not only spurred remarkable infrastructural development, but has fostered a genuine cultural exchange between Chinese and African communities. We might have contradictions there, but we can all agree that based on, the kind of, let me say, state-to-state infrastructural agreements between China and African countries, there is more progress. Unlike when we were under the yoke of Western imperialism. I know it's still existing, but during the neoliberal or the structural adjustment programs, it was worse for us compared to now, where now African countries have alternatives to get finances. And that doesn't mean that I encourage African countries to continue to borrow money. But essentially, we are saying that we need to move from the half-truths and the misinformation of perpetuating Africa against China and its people. Because we know which media monopolizes on information. So that's it. Thank you, comrade.
I would start by I think responding to the question I think that was asked about the Gen Zs and how they did not take power. I think the Gen Z uprising is one movement that has not been properly understood in its right context and how it came to be. So I think for anybody to say or suggest that the Gen Z movement has not been successful is misunderstanding the point. And what we need to emphasize is that revolutions don't take a month, they don't take even a year, they take years. What is important is that June 25th and the Gen Z movement is here to stay, and it is what carries the eternal vigilance of a generation that wants to see systemic change in how the government and the people are governed. That need not be underestimated. The timing is everything, and as we get closer to the 2027 elections, people would start to see a different dimension of how that Gen Z movement then morphs into now having a leadership and a structure that will gravitate towards positioning them to take over power in whichever way, using the system that exists to have the power grab. And you can already tell with the Linda Mwananchi and the emerging new political forces, the Nico Kadi movement, and we would see as we get closer to the elections. The other thing I wanted to add on to the Conservancy's question is that you would realize that a lot of the Conservancy's land is actually land that sits on high mineral-rich land in the country. And there is evidence we have done, there is research, there has been media exposés to show that actually these conservancies have been used for illicit mining and extraction of mineral resources from Kenya to the West. There is a lot of evidence to that effect. You can go online and look. I think there is a famous documentary that has been done. I'll check the actual link and share. So that has been the secret, and that is how minerals from Kenya have been exploited secretly without the Kenyan people benefiting from those resources soon after independence and over the years. I want to talk about the devolution question. Very good concept that really should be able to grow the Kenyan, economy in terms of taking resources closer to the people and decentralizing service delivery. There are some places where it has worked. The experiment has, unfortunately, also in the same vein, ended up devolving corruption and all the bad manners that we were trying to run away from. So on the balance of things, it is a good thing, but we are still struggling to get it right, especially from the perspective of the people who are given the opportunity to be the custodians of those resources that are coming from the central government coming down. So it is a mixed bag of results so far. Some have worked, some have not worked very well, but it is a work in progress. And I think more needs to be done in terms of, doing the monitoring and evaluation, being able to call out where there is excesses in terms of corruption and bad governance, so that then the people can be able to benefit from that. The last two questions I would respond to is what was asked directly to me, is on the question of African Stream and whether the allegations by then Secretary Blinken, the Kenyan government.
For context, I don't know how many people know about African Stream. Can you tell?
Yeah, I would try and speak about it in summary. African Stream is a media organization that did a lot of work in Africa, in Kenya. But then Secretary Blinken, I think this was during Trump 1, came out and alleged that Africa Stream was a Russian.
Well, it was doing Biden.
Was it Biden?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
because Anthony Blinken is Biden.
So the whole point about that is that Blinken then alleged that African Stream was bidding for Russia, or it was controlled by the Russians with a view to getting and hitting back at the Western powers. There was that allegation. There was a call for the Kenyan government to act on this. Just like many other projects, we have nothing to put our hands on in terms of what happened became of that. But what we know is that African Stream was largely dismembered, and its capacity, really put under a lot of stress. And there has been little to talk about in the, subsequent time period after that. And it is a going concern in terms of how the imperialism then is playing its excesses in terms of media control, which is what we are seeing actually in Kenya, like I spoke about earlier, that there is a lot of power and brutalizing of the media, so that it speaks to a certain narrative that is controlled by the powers that be and the dictatorship. And this happens through control of advertising revenue, controlling editorial independence or dependence, as it were, so that journalists with independence and a mindset that is critical of the imperial powers and the powers that be are targeted. And this is the response to your question about safety of media practitioners. I will tell you that even today, media are among the sector that was targeted during the by-elections that we talked about. Media journalists were being harassed, their equipment confiscated, and some of us have borne the brunt of being targeted and goons being mobilized against us. We run an independent media entity called Kuruzi News, and in our part of our work, we have been targeted we probably faced goons before they were deployed in the manner that we see today. And there's a whole story that we have out there to tell. If you check online, you would see that journalists are not safe. Journalists are being killed. They are being given options whether to continue to do their job as they should, or they play to the control of the state. And you can remember that Kenya is the country where the Pakistani journalist Ashraf Karim was killed by the police while he was in the country seeking asylum. So that speaks to the state of the country. Kenya is where media houses are being raided, newsrooms, police are being deployed against the media in Kenya. Yet, from the outside looking inside, you think that Kenyan media is independent. It is not. Journalists in Kenya are targeted. They are not safe. And I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Any journalist who does a story, they do so at their own peril.
Thank you. Now, there is, I would say, the African stream has had maybe a recreation because it was closed down. So I asked people to check out Sovereign Media, which actually.
I'll wrap up quickly. I'll touch on the China question and on the DC question. And I'll clarify, speak in my own personal capacity, because even within our organization, this is a hotly contested question about the nature of China's relationship with Africa. In my opinion, China is ultimately a self-interested country, but because it is a country whose system is socialism with Chinese characteristics, it pursues its interests in a totally different way than America does. In a country where capital is subordinate to the state and the interests of the people, it is still looking to improve the lives of Chinese people by any means necessary. Sometimes it makes mistakes, but China is the only superpower I've seen where it has a self-correction mechanism where they can constantly reflect on their strategies and see, hey, maybe these 5-year loans weren't working in Sri Lanka or this other country. We need to expand them to 10-year loans. We need to do this and do that to make sure that the relationship is not so predatory. With America, and this ties to the second question about my experience in politics here, regardless of who is in power, the interests of the capitalist class prevails. How can we maximize profit at the expense of people here and in the periphery? It doesn't matter who we are talking about. The gears of this machine always seem to tread towards the humiliation and exploitation of people, not just here in America, but more brazenly in the people in those countries. It doesn't mean that those things can't change. When I came to America first, I really believed in the American project as it was sold to us, that, people come out there and they vote for things they believe in. And I've been on both sides of election day too often to see what informs actually what kind of campaigns win and what kind of campaigns lose. And you have to be answerable to the people who fund those campaigns if you're going to win. And unfortunately, what those donors want is very often completely divergent from what working people want. China offers us an alternative where there is a regime that is not completely dominated by one party, where we have a financial regime where one country doesn't get to say you are excluded from global trade and your people will suffer as a result unless you do what we want to say. At the very least, having an alternative currency system, an alternative payment system, an alternative financial system is very important for countries in the global south. And that's why you've seen all the energy towards the BRICS project and how we can advance that. It's because we all recognize that the system that has of sanctions, which on its own has led to millions of deaths in the peripheries by objective measures, has been damaging, to which we always need an alternative. The multipolar world that is not dominated by one power is one that is more promising for us, no matter what. And so I think it's a relationship that we need to actively inform to make sure it is working for the interests of our people as well. But you have a responsive partner as opposed to a dominant partner, a self-interested partner nonetheless, but a responsive partner in China, and is forcing America to operate differently as well. So being able to leverage both is really important to where we're going. The last point I'll make on the books that I would recommend for you to read, maybe we can talk a little bit more about those after, but It's Our Time to Eat teaches a lot about the mechanics of corruption, even with reformer governments in Kenya. Britain's gulags will tell you about how this comprador class was formed, the death that is caused. And an older book, Gangs and Pseudo Gangs, teaches how the British political class created the dominant class that is was designed to subordinate the freedom movements, and by implanting local Africans to sort of act as agents within those freedom movements that were working for alternative projects. But we need options, and that is to our benefit. It's Britain's gulags.
And I would add that Professor PLO Lumumba writings, Africa Arise, PLO Lumumba, speaks very eloquently about Pan-Africanism and the anti-imperialism spirit. And I think you would also benefit from Ngugi wa Thiong'o's writings, Decolonizing the Mind, and among many others, including fictional writings that he did, which are very symbolic of the struggle for African independence and the promotion of African values.
One very quick point. The best way for American people to be helpful in this struggle is not to voting. It can only be helpful so much, but draining the political class's ability to organize violence is the only thing that will significantly change the dynamic. Revolution is actually the only thing that can be the forum for justice in these situations, but their ability to suppress that comes from the weapons that are being paid for with your taxpayer dollars.
Thank you very much. So thank you. We gotta wrap it up.
Just 10 seconds.
We're 15 minutes over time. Actually, 20 minutes over time. So I'm sorry, but thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for people online. Thank you for the panelists online, Ashlyn, Valentine, Dr.
Milton.
Milton, Dr. Malcolm, Milton, Brother Milton, and Luca. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you gotta do the end it.